Today is the fourth of a series of lectures, the SNU IIC lecture series on India and the world. We've had three terrific lectures preceding today's as part of the series on issues as diverse as financial policy, urban-rural migration, healthcare policy, and we have several more to come in the next couple of weeks after today's session. The purpose of the series was to address some of the most significant national policy issues, both in the context of national policy, but also in the context of what's going on in the rest of the world. Of these lectures, the one that I've been looking forward to the most is today's. The reason for that being that in all of these lectures, in all of the national policy issues, in all of our discourses on the challenges that the country faces, there is an underlying assumption, sometimes an underlying hope, really, that we will somehow be able to find the skilled human capital necessary to be able to advance the policy agenda, to be able to find the solutions required for India's development and growth. And it's not clear that we can. But whether we can or not, and what will it require for us to do so, are significant questions. And perhaps we have two people here today who are perhaps the best people in the country to address these issues. Manish Sabharwal, who heads up India's largest organization involved in providing human capital for the needs of industry, for the needs of organizations across the country. And Kiran Karnik, the chair of our session today, who led the organization that is sometimes best associated with the new developments in Indian human capital, which is the IT industry. In addition to that, continues to contribute both in the skilling as well as the higher education arena through various ways. I won't go into the details. They're both well known to you. I won't take up your time with their bios. If you don't know about them, you can read about them as well. And with that, I'd like to invite Kiran and Manish to come on stage. And over to you, Kiran.
Vice Chancellor Nikhil Sinha, Dean Subhashish, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Both a pleasure and a privilege to be here. A special pleasure because this is a very nice gathering which has great discussions with great speakers, and today we have Manish Sabharwal who's going to speak on something which is very, very important, and a word about Manish later. It's also a pleasure because apart from knowing Manish and his thoughts, ideas, and very exciting way of looking at things, he's a good friend, and so very happy to be here with him. Thank you, Manish, for being here today. I'm indeed happy that I'm with you in this session. Just a couple of sentences. I want to hand it over to Manish because he is the star and he's, as I said earlier, in this area very, very, innovative in what he's done. The whole area of skills, training, and what we need to do. Many of us often talk of the demographic dividend. Quite a change from many years ago when the concern was just controlling the population. And I see Shailaja somewhere here. Who's deeply involved in that and continues to do some great work in that area. And I think that the thoughts behind this have now changed. Yes, there's some concern about what do we need to do, but the greater emphasis now on saying, hey, we have all these young people. What can we do? It's a great opportunity. And everywhere in the world, as economists will tell you, the demographic dividend is seen as pushing up your GDP by at least a couple of percentage points. And it happens because that's the history, that's the legacy. But when you look at where it's happened, and when you look at the kind of impact it's had, the impact has been really substantial in countries in East and Southeast Asia. And these are countries that put education up front. They did a lot on skills. And so when their young people came into the job market, they were well educated, and most of them were well trained and skilled. We have a serious problem there. And the demographic dividend could well turn into a demographic disaster if we don't look at what we do about education and skilling. Because if you can't get the right jobs, and jobs are not just about getting foreign investment or Indian investment for that matter, it's about having the right people doing the right value addition. The days when you could, get some untrained people, unskilled people, and get some work done and become a big economy by, just doing things well and efficiently, in many ways the Chinese examples of 20, 30 years ago, is something that many friends in India think we can emulate because we have an employment problem. The fact of it is that, and I'm being very blunt and probably open to contradiction later, and including from Manish, is that I don't think we can compete in that space at all. We are by nature inefficient. We don't like to do things in a given, defined, proper, efficient way. We like to do things in our own way. As I tell people very often, when I see production lines in China or Korea, you see everybody working systematically and continuously, almost like robots. You go to India, the guy first says, why should I do it this way? Then he says, all right, but let me try something else. Then he talks to his neighbor. Then he wants a tea break. And that's the way we work. And you see it on our roads. You see the indiscipline everywhere. But it also means that we are thinking, which is good. But how do you build the skills to be able to add value? And today, it's about value added. Yes, we want to make in India, but we need to do high value added things if we want to compete, because we can't compete on pure efficiency. We can't export, to put it again crudely, underwear or cheap toys and hope to win the world market. That's not our forte, according to me. I think we need skills and training. And that's an area in which, after years of talking about it and some years of pushing ahead, we have not made much progress. There are good schemes, good talk, good intent, but translating on the ground seems difficult. If there's one person who's done a great deal on this, it is Manish. He's done some extraordinary work. He's got great ideas. And, his voice is heard. That's an important and difficult thing to do. Many of us might have ideas, but we won't test them on the ground. He has, actually. He runs a very large organization as chairman of TeamLease. So he's, in some sense, put his action where his mouth is and also put his money there. And he's showed how it works. He's advising many governments. He's come up with many ideas. And I'm looking forward to hearing him and his thoughts on how we move ahead, as he said, to create employment and skilling for 1 billion Indians. Because that's what we need to do. Without that, I really fear that the demographic dividend will be a demographic disaster. If you have a lot of unemployed people, which will happen if they're unskilled and uneducated, the social unrest will not take our GDP up, but down by 2 or 3 percentage points. So look forward to hearing Manish and his ideas and thoughts on this, which comes from both deep thinking and also actually using it on the ground. Just want to add a sentence that, among all the people whom I know who work in these areas, Manish is not only amongst the most erudite, but his turn of phrase, and I hope you'll see some of that, is fantastic. I don't know how many of you read his very regular writings, and I always love, quite apart from the content, I like to search for the little nuggets where he's thrown something, and I'm sure we'll hear some of them. So over to you, Manish.
Thanks.
What we'll do is, after Manish speaks, we'll have a brief Q&A if there's time. And I said brief because I like questions to be brief, and I'm sure the answers will be brief. Thank you.
Thank you, Kiran. So I work for a people supply chain company. We've hired somebody every 5 minutes for the last 5 years, but we've only hired 5% of the kids who came to us for a job. So we're sort of at the agony and ecstasy of India's labor market, if you think about it, right? The ecstasy is obvious. I'm a child of lower hiring standards. Kids who got jobs with me today would not have got a job 3 years ago or 5 years ago. And I know economists might worry about the productivity implication of that, but that is true. I mean, I had a telecom client shouting at me saying, I have 200 sales positions, why haven't you filled them up? A few weeks ago, I said, well, I'm doing it for all your competitors. Your hiring standards are too high. So he called me back in a few hours and said, okay, I need a pair of hands. I don't care if a brain comes attached. We did those in a few hours. But that's the ecstasy, right? Kids are getting into the formal labor force because domestic consumption is driving that, and I'll come back to that. But the agony wasn't as obvious to me before I started TeamLease. We had a job fair in Jaipur, 35,000 people showed up. I met 800 of them. I can guarantee if they were born in Delhi, Bombay or Bangalore, they would have had a job, but they were born in Dausa or Barmer or Jhunjhunu or Ajmer. So the two most important decisions a child in India makes are to choose your parents wisely and to choose your PIN code wisely. All of you are sitting here because you did that. You may not appreciate it, but I get 90,000 kids who come to me every month and I hire 4,500 of them. Most of them, they don't have a birth defect. They did what their parents told them to do. They went to college, they went to school, but they're just not employable. So even more than the employability question, really, for me, the most fascinating or the most interesting question of all times is why our country is poor. I really do think about that, because when I went to the US in 1994 for my MBA in August, and by September I was asking myself, these Americans aren't smarter than us, why are they richer than us? Clearly at an individual level I can kick their butt, but the system has capabilities which allows Joe Sixpack, who drinks beer and watches soccer, to get $50,000 a year. That is interesting, but it's nothing to do with Joe Sixpack, right? It's got to do with the capabilities which have been embedded in the system. So, and anyway, it's a random variable, right? Why are countries poor is an interesting question. Some blame religion, some blame culture, some blame weather, some blame, there are probably 20 unsatisfactory explanations for that. So let's focus on what can you do about it. And I think when you think about what can you do about poverty, you have to be careful. See, India's unemployment rate is not a fudge. 4.2 unemployment rate is not a fudge. Everybody has a job. Unfortunately, most people who have jobs don't make enough money to pull out of poverty. So 40% of our labor force is working poor. So jobs and productivity are two sort of different questions. They're related very often, but it's important to make peace with the fact that our problem is not jobs, it's productivity. I think you have to also make peace with the instruments, right? 3 E's versus laws or subsidy. I mean, we've just coming out of 10 years of a government which said Right to Education Act, Right to Work Act, Right to Food Act. You spend 2,20,000 crores on NREGS. I mean, more people in India have cell phones than bathrooms. Does that mean we should have a Right to Bathroom Act, or shall we figure out how 1 billion cell phones got in the hands of people without any government subsidies? To my mind, this is not a problem like cancer or climate change. It's a problem of execution. My favorite quote of all times, because it applies to entrepreneurs, is obviously Mario Cuomo. He was the governor of New York, who used to say, we politicians campaign in poetry, but you govern in prose. I think this is a prose problem. This is not a poetry problem. Nobody really disagrees. I mean, I know people like to position the left and right as if we're going different places. We're arguing about how to get there. I think another important thing for India, which is just starting to look nicer, is one of the most painful things for me was people lumping India with the BRICS, right? The Brazil, Russia, and Indonesia and other emerging markets. Now, they are commodity economies, right? I mean, they married a pregnant bride. They can't take credit for what happened. But India is very economically complex. One of my favorite professors at the Kennedy School, Ricardo Hosman, says economic complexity is the best predictor of success. We make everything and we do everything. We don't always do it well, we don't always do it at scale, but we are very economically complex, and any strategy which you sort of think about. So you're a 10 horsepower engine running on 4 horsepower. You're not a 4 horsepower engine where you're trying to increase horsepower, and you've got to think of that when you do your strategy. And finally, at least I make the case that after 20 years of economic reform, the problem is not the sins of commission, what the government does wrong, it's actually the sins of omission. My parents retired to Kanpur, they were civil servants. The 4 fastest growing industries in Kanpur are private bottled water, private security, private generators, and private schools. There is no state in UP, right? Even the poor are buying their water and electricity. So that has huge impacts for entrepreneurship. We keep talking about what the government does wrong. Flick of pen reforms are done. Now we're banging against the limits of state capacity reforms. So if this is all about productivity, and I believe poverty is about productivity, I'd like to make the case that it's about fixing sort of the 5 geographies of work: the physical geography of work, the sectoral geography of work, the enterprise geography of work, the education geography of work, and the legislative geography. And I'll explain all of them, but I'll only focus on the solutions in my area, which is really the 3 E's. So why is India's productivity low? I would argue one is the physical geography of work, which is the mother nature question of do you take jobs to people or people to jobs? In political imagination, you're always taking jobs to people. But we only have 50 cities with more than 1 million people. China now has 380 cities with more than 1 million people. We have 6 lakh villages. 2 lakh of those villages have less than 200 people. You're not going to take job creation there. And because of political imagination around urbanization, I'm getting murdered because of the massive divergence between real wages and nominal wages in the big cities. So we've hired 15 lakh people in the last 8 years, of which 10 lakh we moved kids from small cities to big cities. But in the last 2 years, it's becoming impossible. I had a kid in Gwalior job fair recently who told me, give me 4,000 rupees in Gwalior, 6,000 rupees in Gurgaon, 8,000 rupees in Delhi, and 18,000 rupees in Bombay. My bags are packed, tell me where you want me to go. I said, why do you need 4 times more money to go to Bombay? He said, जितने बच्चे 10,000 में गए थे सब वापस आ गए, खाना रहना और ऑफिस जाना अब नहीं बनता 10,000 में. I said, तुम तो साला 4th class पास है, तुमको 18,000 रुपए कौन देगा? He says, मैं graduate से खाना कम थोड़ी खाता हूँ. So obviously a smart cookie, we hired him on the spot. but he was sort of he wasn't asking for salary, he was asking for a reimbursement, right? And the fact that we don't have a Chinese New Year in India really pisses me off, right? And 300 million people buy a ticket and train ticket and go home in February for that 4-day weekend. We don't have that on Chhat, Diwali, Eid or Christmas. We should, because if you can't take jobs to people, you need to take people to jobs. That's really what the physical geography of work is about. If you think about the sectoral geography of work, only 11% of India works in manufacturing, and that's a point Kiran made, but that's the same as post-industrial United States. I mean, I don't think we'll get to China's 35% of manufacturing, but have we really crossed? I mean, China has crossed the Lewisian turning point, right? And Arthur Lewis got the Nobel Prize for when you run out of farm labor. But one of my most depressing meetings last week was with the CEO of Foxconn. They're coming to India and they're already a large client. And he said two things. One is, I'm moving my factory 3,000 kilometers inland to pay the same wages. I thought that was kind of interesting. He says, yeah, because originally Chinese New Year used to be 350 million people buying a train ticket. Then it became 280 million. Now it's 200 million. So 1 in 3 people who go home for Chinese New Year now no longer come back because their opportunities or similar wages appear where they're. That's a really cool thing, right? But the other thing he said, I said, your Chongqing facility has 3 lakhs, right? So how many are going to be your biggest facility in India? He said, I'm going to cap it at 25,000. He says, I don't think I can handle a factory with more than 25,000 employees in India. I said, why? Is it labor laws? Is it regulatory cholesterol? Is it ease of doing business? He said, it's all of the above. I don't know why it is, but I've basically concluded that we're going to cap our facility at 25,000. That's kind of sad, right? I mean, what India does need is a 150,000 factory in the middle of nowhere where you've got the farm to non-farm transition in China really happened to factories. In our case, it's happening to sales or customer service. That's interesting whether you can actually sort of sustain that model. But 50% of India is self-employed. Now that's not some overweighted entrepreneurial gene among Indians. The poor cannot afford to be unemployed, so they're self-employed. So whenever you talk about entrepreneurship as a solution, you have to be careful because there's a difference between a baby and a dwarf, right? As an entrepreneur, there are 2 kinds of companies you can create. Both are small, but the baby is going to grow and the dwarf is going to stay there. The difference between a baby and a dwarf is not more food. And the next point, which will demonstrate to you that the enterprise geography of work, India is largely babies. So we have 63 million enterprises in India. 12 million of them don't have an office or an address. 12 million of them work from home. Only 8.5 million enterprises in India have any form of GST, PAN number, TAN number, or anything, any number you could think about for tax. Only 1.5 million enterprises in India pay Provident Fund or ESI. There are only 1 million companies with the Registrar of Companies. So there are only 1 million companies, but there are only 14,500 companies in India with a paid-up capital of more than 10 crores. Now, 10 crores is not a really large number. It's $1.6 million. You only have 14,500 companies with that. So 63 million enterprises means nothing if it translates to such low level of formality. And my problem is not only informality and size, but it's also productivity, right? So if you rank manufacturing companies in India by size, at the 90th percentile and the 10th percentile, there'll be a 22 times difference in productivity. Now, if there's that much difference in productivity, you can't pay the wage premium. If you can't pay the wage premium, then you're stuck in the low-level equilibrium forever and ever, which is really why we're a nation of corporate dwarfs rather than corporate babies. Now, that may have various reasons for why you're doing that or why it is. I think the education geography of work, many of you know the problem at the 3 levels, right? There's schools and there's skills and there's higher education. Schools is, we're fighting yesterday's war in RTE, right? Our enrollment ratio is 110%. We've got kids back in school and people are sort of coming back in school, but we don't have learning outcomes. But we still do have a problem, right? Why do I only hire 5% of the kids who come to me for a job? It's because of school, skills, and college. Let's not blame it on one. But just to jog your memory, 26 million kids take the class 10th exam every year, 10 million fail. 16 million take the class 12th exam every year, 8 million fail. 5 million go to college every year, and 3 million sort of disappear. And RTE is basically fighting the enrollment war, but RTE sort of confuses school buildings with building schools. Those are 2 completely different things, but we're not, so we need a Right to Learning Act rather than a Right to Education Act because we've already solved the enrollment problem. But if you take the skills system, we have a mismatch between what we're teaching and what people like us want. We still teach an automobile mechanic with a carburetor. No Indian car is made with a carburetor. We still have to certify an electrician on a DC fan. Nobody uses a DC fan, but whenever the ITI principal goes to the market and tries to get a DC fan, he says, ITI mein kaam karte kya? Because the only guy buying a DC fan is working in an ITI, which is true. So this, you've sort of had a huge divergence between what they're teaching and what we need to teach them. And I think college, I'll come back to this question later, but that's an interesting question. How much of your percent of your population should go to college, right? College is important. Social signaling value of college is important to people. All of you will be patronizing and say college doesn't matter, but vocational training is usually for other people's children, it's not for our children. Let's be careful when we patronize about that. The social signaling value, Michael Spence got the Nobel Prize for his work on the social signaling value of higher education. You know, I went to Wharton, my wife went to Harvard. These places are good places to be at, but better places to be from. The fundamental value is being from Wharton or from IIT or from IIM rather than being at IIT or IIM or Shiv Nadar University. And so to my mind, you've got to be careful when we talk about what percentage of our kids should go to college. But there is a problem in college. College isn't what it used to be. 31% of retail sales clerks in the US now have a college degree. That used to be 1% in 1970. 60% of taxi drivers in Korea now have a college degree. That used to be 1% 10 years ago. 15% of high-end security guards in India now have a college degree. That used to be 1% 5 years ago. So college isn't what it used to be, but social signaling value of college matters. And we'll come back to that sort of topic on what can we do about it. The legislative geography of work is labor laws. This is a complicated question, but I would submit that, you know, in 1990 we had 90% informal employment. In 2015 we have 90% informal employment. Now informality happens for many reasons, but 100% of net job creation in India happening in informal jobs, there has to be some role of labor laws. You know, an employment contract which is marriage without divorce. I mean, it's hard to have a one-way street. I mean, how many people will sign a lease which they can never end? How many employers? And again, you have to remember your stereotype of employers is Reliance or Birla or me who wears a suit and a tie. I'm a sampling error. It's the 63 million enterprises who are corporate India or enterprises. It's not us. You have to take us out of the sample. We're not even a rounding error in the total sort of enterprise stack of India. And I think the world of work is changing, and we're not, see, employment has shifted from being a lifetime contract to a taxi cab relationship. The Uberization of the labor force at one extreme where Uber has no employees and everybody is self-employed, or the state electricity board at one extreme where you have a defined benefit, index-linked pension guaranteed from life. I think life will come somewhere in between, but you have to recognize that institutions aren't what they used to be. The average life expectancy of a Fortune 500 company in 1935 was 65 years. In the last list, which came out 2 weeks ago, it's 15. These are not companies, these are projects. We treat them as if they're immortal, you know, Provident Fund is attached to the employer. Well, the employer's own is Flipkart a company or a project? I mean, so many companies I can think of, they will end up in the hands of somebody else, so you don't really attach benefits to employer, you attach benefits to employees. What does permanent employment really mean? I mean, it was all modeled on the editor of William White, editor of Fortune magazine was a guy called William White. In the 1950s, he wrote a book called Organization Man, where he basically made the case that the only way to get ahead is to be a man, to work for a big organization, to dress the same way, to put your head down, and just fit into the organization. You know, one of the companies he modeled it on was IBM, and IBM just put out some numbers. 50% of IBM employees have been with them less than 2 years. 40% of IBM employees do not go to an IBM office every day, and 30% of IBM employees are now women. So the deconstruction of organizations has happened so thoroughly and so completely, yet in the labor law world, you sort of assume these companies are infinite, they're all big companies, and it's sort of permanently employed. So the sectoral, physical, education, legislative, and enterprise geography of work are the problem why we have a productivity sort of disaster on our hands. It's not just the supply side. We will focus on the supply side more in terms of solutions because demand side is sort of above my pay grade. But I've spent the last 10 years on the supply side, and I would submit that, but you can't think about supply without demand. And so 100% of our skill output wants to go to 1% of our companies. That's not going to happen. And that's really the problem. To talk about skills, I mean, I know there's a chicken and egg problem in these things. Do you get skills first or do you get companies first? And which one would, I mean, the only way to solve a chicken and egg problem is to become vegetarian, right? Is to do something completely different. And you've got to think about it that way, that we can't sort of say that, well, we're going to do RTE and colleges and this, that, but we're not going to focus on labor laws or urbanization or all the other stuff, because the demand side is where everybody wants to go. So on the supply side, there are three buckets of solutions. There are three problems and there are three buckets of solutions. So the three problems are matching, which is connecting demand to supply, mismatch, which is repairing supply for demand, and pipeline, which is preparing supply for demand. And I usually repair and prepare based on the opening balance of the child or the duration of the course. But matching is the lowest hanging fruit, right? We have 1,400 employment exchanges. Last year, to the 4 crore people registered, they only gave 2 lakh jobs. Again, the Nobel Prize, Peter Diamond got his Nobel Prize for his work on search costs and labor markets. How does a kid in Durgapur find a job in Bangalore? How does the kid in Nashik find a job in Bombay? He can't register with an employment exchange. And it's not just information asymmetry, though information asymmetry is a real problem. So you have to convert your employment exchanges to career centers. They have to offer assessment, they have to offer counseling, they have to offer apprenticeships, they have to offer training, and they have to offer pure sort of job matching, and you have to think about how the world of matching is changing in the next few years when most of our kids will have smartphones and be on the internet. I think talking about matching without labor reform doesn't work. 90% informality, you can't build a skill system for informal and self-employed jobs. You can build it for 10% of them, 20% of them, but to say that you're going to sort of build a skill system for 90% of our labor force in the formal sector and then do the matching is not going to work. So I think labor law reform is directly, explicitly and completely connected to any reform of the education and skill system, because we're at the exit gate of the skill system. Today we have 22 definitions of workers. We have 17 definitions of wages. I have 150 guys in my own company whose full-time job is handling the regulatory cholesterol, right? You can't comply with 100% of India's labor laws without violating 15% of them. So it's just the way it is. And it's not just hire and fire. It's not just Chapter 5B of the Industrial Disputes Act where everybody sort of narrows in and saying, well, hire and fire. I mean, we have the highest payroll confiscation in the world. We have to take away I have to take away 45% of salary for anybody who's less than 15,000, while for 55,000, I only have to take away 9% of the salary. PF, ESI, EDLI, EPFO, there's an alphabet soup of 9 deductions I have to make. In fact, I didn't realize how big a problem with this when we started giving people appointment letters. They would say 10,000 rupees. They would say haath wali salary or chitti wali salary, because I have no interest in the chitti wali salary. It was the haath wali salary because that's where I live. And it's not just the savings rate is not there. These are poor value money for programs. Provident Fund is the world's most expensive government securities mutual fund. It charges 340 basis points for a government securities mutual fund. We have lots of government securities mutual funds in India which charge 25 basis points. ESI, which is health insurance, is India's worst health insurance program. It has a claims ratio of 45%. There is no health insurance program in India which has a claims ratio of less than 93%. Why is ESI sitting on 40,000 crores of bank deposits in government securities? It makes no sense to me, yet ESI and EPFO don't have clients, they have hostages. I pay 2% of the ESI in this country. I'm among the largest payers of Provident Fund in the country, yet I have no choice where my kids should be able to send their money, and that's why they treat it as tax, and that's why they go to the informal sector. So if you think about matching as distinct from mismatch, now mismatch is interesting. Lots of solutions are there, right? Apprentices. India only has 3 lakh apprentices. Germany has 3 million, Japan has 10 million, China has 20 million. Learning by doing and learning while learning is a very powerful way of doing skill development. Yes, because of a stupid apprenticeship act written in 1961, which treats an apprenticeship as a job rather than a classroom, you have only 3 lakh apprentices. Now we've had some amendments to the Apprenticeship Act, and we can expect that number to go up substantially. If you think about connectivity between demand and supply, we have the National Occupation Codes. They do a very bad job of signaling to the demand side. And the demand side is getting very sophisticated, right? For example, feet on street, financial services, liabilities, asset sales. Barclays will pay me 25,000 a month and IDBI will pay me 8,000 a month. For a kid the same age and job description exactly the same. or retail floor supervisor, Bose will pay me $35,000 a month and Reliance will pay me $12,000 a month. The kid is the same age, The difference may be body odor, it may be English, it may be soft skills, it may be sales skills, it may be functional skills, but it's clear that we are giving 2-3 times difference in salary to kids the same age for exactly the same job profile. But the supply side has no idea how to do that, and so the sector skill councils are an improvement over the national occupation codes. I think we have to acknowledge that there has to be more innovation in financing. There is a market failure in skill development. See, employers are not willing to pay for training or candidates, but they're willing to pay a premium for trained candidates. Candidates are not willing to pay for training, they're willing to pay for a job. Banks and microfinance aren't willing to lend to the candidate unless a job is guaranteed, and training companies aren't able to fill up their classrooms. So, and the notion, everybody walks around with the notion that corporate India should manufacture its own employees. I mean, that's a little unfair expectation. We already generate our own power, we provide our own transport, we provide our own security, and manufacturing our own employees is a high bar to set. And again, for the 14,500 companies, we may still hold our nose, but the 63 million enterprises can't do that. So it's not only an unrealistic expectation, it's a delusional expectation. If you think about performance management and governance, now the people sort of give up on performance management in schools, and there's no fear of falling, there's no hope of rising. And governance, anybody can say no and nobody can say yes. I mean, to get an ITI, I work with an ITI in Chandigarh, 90% unemployment, one in Gandhinagar with 90% employment. Salary of the principal is the same, their budget is the same, nothing ever changes, right? So the fear of falling and hope of rising is absolutely key, and it's sort of linked to governance. I'll come to pipeline, which is really my own thinking around skills has evolved in the last 10 years, because I've learned that you can't teach people in 6 months what they should have learned in 12 years. So class 12 is already becoming the new class 10. Class 10 had already become the new class 8. There's a new world of work out there where there's no such thing as an unskilled job, right? I pay a 30% wage premium to a receptionist if he can act, to a security guard if he can act as a receptionist during lunch. I can give you so many examples where, and it's not really the skill premium, it's the school premium. Because the most important vocational skills for the new world of work are reading, writing, arithmetic, and soft skills. Now you may say I'm biased because India has only 11% manufacturing, but I think yes, we are services. Our non-farm transition is happening to customer service, sales, and logistics. But I would say the new world of work, class 12 is baseline for even a security guard. You're just not going to be able to. So if you don't fix your school system, we're always trying the triage in agreed, if your building is on fire, you put the fire out, but if your building's on fire, every day somebody's got to think of the building safety code, right, at some point. And it's clear that the skill system is doing some repair. We can do repair, but we can't do prepare from corporate India. And you can't do prepare in 6 months. You have had 12 years to fix that. I think, and that's related to my question around English, right? I am very clear. English is like Windows. It's an operating system. It's not a language. Your employment outcomes are 300% higher if you speak English. And an unintended consequence of the Baptists going to the Northeast is that the migrant from the Northeast gets 15,000 rupees with me, while a migrant from UP and Bihar gets 6,000 rupees with me, because the migrant from the Northeast joins in the front office, and the migrant from UP and Bihar usually joins as a packer and loader. And this is not, I know it's an emotional question with state governments, and in Karnataka, I live in Bangalore, it's a big drama right now going on, but any argument for English is about being bilingual or multilingual, right? So see, the two most interesting poets of Hindi and Urdu poetry in Allahabad University were Harivansh Rai Bachchan and Firaq Gorakhpuri. Both of them were professors of English literature. So you have to so let's not climb on our high horses that you can't do both, and at least in my mind, that's key. So then you come to the question of higher education, which is prepare in my mind. So if you say that you're not going to expand the education system, and cost, quality, and scale are sort of the impossible trinity. John Gardner, he was an education secretary in the 1960s in the US. He wrote a great book called Can We Be Equal and Excellent? It's at the heart of the problem we have. And I think we had a randomized control trial in India in education regulation between engineering and medicine. And you have to think about that. In the last 10 years, now we have 1.5 million engineers a year, and we only have 32,000 doctors a year, right? So 30% of engineering capacity is empty. 30% of engineering colleges are going to shut down. I have a large hospital client in Hyderabad, Care Hospitals. He said, my first 2 hospitals were hotels which were shutting down. My next 2 hospitals are going to be engineering colleges. So it's clear that there's a recycling going on in engineering. But, Mayawati put on 2.5 lakh seats of engineering. 1.25 lakhs of those are empty. There are 200 engineering colleges in Andhra Pradesh which got less than 10 admissions. But there is no capitation fees in engineering. Anybody who wants to be an engineer can be an engineer. India's IT people supply chain has been built on this expansion from 5 lakhs to 15 lakhs. And now you're starting to see faculty salaries going up. But you're seeing a lot of competition. While on the other hand, we only have 32,000 doctors a year. We need probably 1 lakh. There's still 2 crore capitation fees. There are all kinds of problems with medical education. And so in AICT, you had a regulator who was bribed to expand capacity. And in MCI, you had a regulator who was bribed to keep capacity down. From a public policy perspective, I would argue we've ended up with a much better outcome in engineering than we have in medicine. I know those are 2 different professions, but 15 lakh and 32,000 just make no sense. And why I bring this up is it's at the heart of the conflict between being equal and excellent. In a democracy, we have to expand capacity. Now, will that quantity sometimes come at the expense of quality? Yes. But I don't think we know how to expand quality by keeping numbers down. It doesn't really work. And so there is a sort of valley of death you go through when you expand capacity and you get these idiots who start colleges, but then 30% of them are shutting down. I get a call from a politician every week saying, please come and do a job fair at my engineering college. Don't hire anybody, just do a job fair, bring 20 employers. Otherwise, next year I'm shutting it down. It's worth more dead than alive, right? The land has gone up, so I'm going to shut it down. Well, they're going to shut it down. That's good. So I think from a cost, quality, and scale being an impossible trinity, you have to be careful and think about that. I went to Wharton. I paid 19,000 rupees an hour. ISB is 12,000 rupees an hour. IIMs are 8,000 rupees an hour. IITs are 4,000 rupees an hour. ITIs are 200 rupees an hour. Singapore, everybody admires Singapore. We have a partnership with the ITE Singapore for their vocational system. They spend $12,000 a year on a plumber. And the government writes a check for 99% of it. The kid pays 1% of that cost. We spend $12,000 a year on an engineer, so an IT engineer for that matter. So let's not be patronizing when we say we can't manufacture plumbers. Sure, give me $12,000, I'll manufacture any plumber you want. So the pipeline problem is the tension between cost, quality, and scale, which sort of exists across the system. So we might actually have a divergence between the 2 university systems, where you have a small research university thought world, which is what we traditionally think of as a university, and we may have large vocational universities. So what's a vocational university? We have a vocational university in Gujarat, which is the first one in India. When I first applied in 2007 to the chairman of UGC, he said, Mr. Sabharwal, you're very confused. A university cannot be vocational. I said, you idiot, that's exactly why I'm applying. Anyway, they're still sitting on the application. I send them a reminder every 3 months, but even now. But in 2014, the Gujarat Assembly passed a bill for TeamLease Skills University, and we're different from a normal university in 3 ways. One is we pray to one God, which is employers. Second is only 5% of our kids are on campus. The balance are either doing an apprenticeship, or they're online, or they are already in a job. And only 5% of our kids are doing a degree, but 100% of them have the ability to take a 3-month certificate as an opening balance for a 1-year diploma, as an opening balance for a 2-year associate degree, as an opening balance for 3 degrees. This is our first year of operations. We already have 12,000 kids, and at very low cost, and that's the plan. So my submission is, in our mind we have this apartheid between the university system and the training system, but the world of work is changing so quickly, and India's cost, quality, scale trinity means we need to sort of get rid of that. So the supply side I covered in matching, repair, and prepare. The demand side I'll quickly run through, but the physical geography of work is about smart cities, and it is about urbanization. I think the sectoral geography of work is about Make in India. I think the enterprise geography of work is about ease of doing business and GST. I think the legislative geography of work is about labor law reform. So from my vantage point, I know when I come to Delhi, everybody's really depressed about the government and everything else, but we've seen more labor reform in the last 1 year than the last 20 years. Let's be clear about that. And I think it also represents an innovation in the political economy, right? You can make out people's sophistication about the political economy, whether they rant about what to do or how to do it. See, what to do is irrelevant. We've known what to do for ages. Apprenticeship Act reform was the 20th point in Indira Gandhi's 20-point program in 1975. You could fix higher education by changing the date on the Kothari Committee report of 1968. So anybody who talks about what is delusional, because we already know that. Now the question is how and who. That's where you sort of have to innovate, right? Reforms aren't the solving of a sum, they're the painting of a picture. And you have to think about, labor law reform, equating it. That's the one I know. For 20 years, we equated it with Chapter 5B of the Industrial Disputes Act, and it was a 0-100 bet. But there's 14 other things in labor law reform: Provident Fund choice, ESI choice, definition of workers, consolidation of 44 labor laws, consolidation of definition, Apprenticeship Act reform, online compliance, all of what we've got sort of done in the last 1 year. But to my mind, I think there's the broader theme of sort of 254(2) of the Constitution is very important for land and labor markets. There's no such thing as India's land and labor market. 9.5% of Kerala is now Bihari. They sent 10% to the Middle East, so they brought 9.5 here. But and the economic wastelands like UP have completely different land markets than Karnataka or Maharashtra. So 29 chief ministers matter much more than one prime minister for job creation, because for entrepreneurs, that's where the rubber meets the road. So, the notion that 254(1) of the Constitution, which says that whenever central laws and state laws conflict, the central law always wins, was the notion came through the Constituent Assembly after partition. 15 of Indira Gandhi's speech, she says, strong states lead to a weak nation. That's an interesting perspective. But from my perspective, 254(2) of the Constitution, which says the states can amend central laws, and if Delhi agrees, you send it to the president for signature, which has been used, by the way, more in the last 1 year. So Rajasthan used it to amend 4 labor laws. Now Madhya Pradesh has amended 17 laws. Now Punjab is doing 2, Tamil Nadu is doing 3, Odisha is considering 1. At least you've set off thinking. Not everybody's doing the same thing, not everybody's doing the same thresholds, but that's exactly what China's genius was. It wasn't some Ayatollah in Beijing issuing fatwas, it was mayors competing at the local level. You're doing, in fact, more than 29 chief ministers, 100 mayors matter, right? But we don't have real mayors, or there's only one real mayor in India, the chief minister of Delhi. But in 1924, Jawaharlal Nehru was the mayor of Allahabad, Vallabhbhai Patel was the mayor of Ahmedabad, Chittaranjan Das was the mayor of Calcutta, and Rajendra Prasad was the mayor of Patna. I have 8 letters of Jawaharlal Nehru talking about streetlights. I have 6 letters of Vallabhbhai Patel talking about sewage outside the school. Those are the issues which matter for schools. So line of sight for job creation, schools, education matters much more. So if you think about where we are on the supply side, in repair, prepare, and matching. If you think about demand, which is physical, ease of doing business, and that, I at least believe, there's a difference between a list of ingredients and a recipe. I think India has been shortchanged in the past based on how the world also perceived us. We are much more economically complex than most other countries. I landed, when I landed in the US for my MBA, there was in 1994, there was a front page article on the Wall Street Journal where he said, India is more interesting than important. I hope that journalist is eating the newspaper on which he wrote that, right? I mean, what's happening in India is not once in a decade or once in a millennium, it's really once in the lifetime of a country. That said, I memorized Pandit Nehru's Tryst with Destiny speech when I was a kid, and we missed our Tryst with Destiny. I see that more than anybody else. There are 300 million people in India who will never read the newspaper that they deliver, or sit in the car that they clean, or send their kids to the school that they help build. This is not a problem like cancer or climate change. I just find it so infuriating when politicians in their mental narrative give up. And they say, we have spent 2,20,000 crores on NREGS to fix this. Rather than unpack it as a plumbing problem, to say what is the governance, what is the performance management, what is the specific product, what is the speed limit for formalization, how do we increase the costs of informality, how do we reduce the costs of formality, how do we vocationalize higher education, because that's the only way to massify higher education, how do we create better connectivity. These are non-fiscal interventions. These don't require that much money, right? And one of the biggest problems I have had in the past with the government is, how do you get something done when everybody who matters in government agrees with you, right? It's sort of, Margaret Thatcher had this cabinet minister who used to keep talking and keep writing reports and keep appointing committees, but he would never get anything done. So she turned to him in a cabinet meeting and she said, John, you know what your problem is? Your brain is not attached to your backbone. I can think of so many people in Delhi who would fit that description. But I would submit, at least from my vantage point, and I'm saying this again and again, it's we've known what to do in schools and skills for a long time. Rajasthan just amended the Right to Education Act. They're calling it the Right to Learning Act. I think there's state skill missions, I can think 6 of them which are being quite aggressive. Obviously, there's differential outcomes, but at least you've got more sort of stuff going on. I think we're making a number of statistically independent, genetically diverse tries. Some of them will work out, some of them will scale, some of them won't work out. But as an entrepreneur, life is about hypothesis testing. You can't prove anything right, you have to prove it wrong. How do you prove something right? You can't prove it right. So you encourage people to experiment. You encourage people to experiment at scale. I mean, we've hired 15 lakh people. If some of the stuff that we're been asking for 10 years happens, I can guarantee I will hire 30 lakh people. My average salary is 17,000 rupees. The average age of my employees is 19. It's his first job. We have employees in 5,000 cities across the country. Because India's people supply chain is broken. This is not a difficult problem to solve. So if you have to shift your frame a little bit from, I mean, I really think about it as fundamental rights versus directive principles. The fundamental rights were about political democracy, but directive principles were about economic and social democracy. You can't do economic and social democracy without the 3 E's of education, employment, and employability. Anything else is a band-aid. A job, skills, and education changes a life in a way that no subsidy ever can. And so once you place jobs at the heart of policy making, you will think very differently about the agenda. I think that at least now, after 20 years of a collective therapy session, we're sort of getting to the point where skills, education, and employment are much more closely connected. I think this has also been a challenge in the past where the government is organized vertically, but this problem is a horizontal. You can't finance skill development unless it leads to a job. You can't teach somebody in 3 weeks or 6 weeks what he should have learned in 12 years. You can't really remove the signaling value of vocational education or improve it unless you connect it to higher education. So the traditional partition, now we've got 6 states which have converged their ITIs with their apprenticeships, with higher education. Rajasthan has done it, Gujarat has done it, now 4 more states are starting to think about it. So you at least have one neck to catch, right? You know, Socrates used to say a slave who has 3 masters is free. In the past, everybody's an alibi for each other, right? You just can't catch one neck. I think that's also changing. So I am actually quite clear now that in the next 10 years, we will hire 2 million people, or maybe 3 million people, at a multiple of minimum wage. So don't believe this is going to be at a much higher level than what we've done in the past. If Make in India works, we'll do that in manufacturing. But you know, this prediction where jobs will be is usually a mug's game, right? It doesn't really work. Every country has tried to do that. We're the waiter in the restaurant. We're not the chef. I mean, everybody sort of believes that they're the chef, and you know, we've seen that movie before, and we know how it ends. So my submission is just make the system more flexible, just make the system more modular, just make the system more sort of open, and think of the 3 E's in connectivity. Then you made a sort of new appointment with your tryst with destiny, and I think that's one which you can keep. Thank you.
Thank you, Manish. Thank you very much for that very broad, wide-ranging visit to the whole space of jobs, employment, training, and in many ways much beyond that. I'm sure you all agree to my initial comments about listening to Manish's not only erudition but his turn of phrases. I've done many of them for future use without paying him a royalty. We can take some questions. Manish has kept time very, very sharp. I noticed that. Make a good professor. He knows when the bell rings, even before it does. We can take questions, but may I request brief questions so we have time. He can have time to elaborate the answers, and many more people can get a chance to interact and participate. Yes, back there, please. Yes, please go ahead. I think there might be a mic, or you might have to speak up a bit.
Thank you. You made many interesting points, and I agree with a large number of them. I had one specific question. You know, you made this point about transitioning from the informal to the formal. How do you see these 2 codes that the government has brought out? I mean, in terms of raising the skill deficit that you graphically pointed out, and also in transitioning the informal to the formal, which I see as your broad agenda?
So, I mean, nobody can explain why India has 90% informality. I mean, Brazil has 65, so we're an outlier by most standards. It's not cultural. That's just my take. I don't believe there's anything about cultural. In fact, I completely disagree when Kiran makes comments like India will not be good at manufacturing, because what does that mean? I mean, white people are better than us. I mean, the Hindu rate of growth, right? What did the Hindu rate of growth mean? We didn't shoot all the Hindus after 2, and we're now growing at 7, right? So I had a kid in Dausa, who asked me he was at a job fair, and we gave him a job in Jaipur at 4,000 rupees. I think this was a few years ago. And he went out to his father and came back in and said, "Jonkri nahi chahiye." I said, "You were just crying for so much. Call your father here." And I spent half an hour with his father. And his father said, "Listen to me for half an hour," and said, "Tum shahar wale nahi samajhte. Hum ladki, vote aur naukri sirf apni jaat mein dete hain." And he took his son and went off. I was like, what a nut. And anyway, I fretted and fumed for half an hour. Then I said, I'm going to send so I sent our employment officer to his house. I said, वो गलती हो गई, वो 4,000 की नौकरी नहीं है, 12,000 की नौकरी है. He works with us now. So what you were attributing to caste was actually the difference between haath wali salary and chitti wali salary, and difference between nominal wage and real wage. So I would submit that I see this, I mean, the kids in smaller cities are more hungry and more grateful than kids in big cities. So there's all kinds of sort of cultural explanations we have, which in my mind now don't mean anything. Because I meet a lot of lazy South Indians and a lot of very hard-working Biharis and all kinds of stupid stereotypes which are all that. So the formalization, to my mind, there is a narrative that there's something big about India and informality. My submission is the labor codes, which consolidate 44 labor laws into 4. Is that the one you're? Yes. It's actually going to be 4 labor codes, and I think that will make some difference to formality. I think GST will make a huge difference to formality. I think reducing the distance between haath wali salary and chitti wali salary is an important component now. Because in the 70s or 80s, employers may have said ki ESI or PF we don't want to give. But now it's the kids who fight with us saying, please don't give us ESI and PF. Just say, if you're saying 10,000, figure out a way how to give me 9,000 or 8,000. Don't give me 5,000 rupees. So I would submit that individual behavior is driving the informalization because of the big payroll wedge between that. So in the last budget, there actually has been an announcement, which the Ministry of Labor has had an antibiotic reaction to and is fighting, which says that the Provident Fund you can pay to NPS or you can pay to Provident Fund, and instead of ESI you can buy to health insurance. So I would submit that the payroll wedge today would add another 10% to inform, but you would actually as much as that. Because people can't live on half their salary at low wages. It's a fascinating, I mean, NSS data tells us that they don't have a 46% savings rate at 10,000 rupees a month. Well, if you're going to take away 46% of the salary, there's a deal to be done between the informal employer and them to split the difference. So I'm actually, if GST happens, that would be a big one. I think the payroll wedge happens, that would be a big one. I think besides the 4 labor codes, you obviously have to work on other labor laws. I mean, the criminality in some of them, there's a lot of stuff in there. See, the only 4 things or 5 things which need to be non-negotiable in labor laws need to be minimum wages, need to be benefits, needs to be working safety conditions, and needs to be leave. Those should be non-negotiable. We should put people in jail who don't. All the other stuff is nice. I mean, people can choose to do it or not, but let's enforce the hell out of our law. I mean, in India, we have these huge transmission losses between how the law is written, interpreted, practiced, and enforced. That diminishes the state. I don't think that's reform. To say that you will not enforce the law, but you will leave it on. Why do we only have 50 million people paying Provident Fund, or 50 million accounts? Why do we have 20 million? Why can't we enforce Provident Fund? I don't believe that that's. So if you have Provident Fund, you can't enforce it because you're asking for 30% of wages. If you bring it down to 15 and put people in jail, then it'll be fine. So my submission is informality will improve once you bring the laws lower, and then you improve state capacity for enforcement. I think right now the binding constraint is lowering the level is fine, but today's state capacity for enforcement, the plumbing, the electronic infrastructure like the tax information network, we don't have a labor information network. I mean, the information systems are just so, the plumbing is just so out of date that it won't happen. So yes, I completely agree with you that these things will change formality, but I think we'll have to broaden the ambit before we start seeing a big move from sort of 10% formality to 50, which is what most other emerging markets are at.
Thank you. Yes, please. Question here.
Thank you very much, for a very thank you. I've been truly enlightened. But as we know that India is still 70% rural, and our agriculture seems to be always falling. Every time we read some data about the GDP growth, the agriculture sector has always been falling, and then children of rich farmers, they want to leave the country and migrate to Canada or some other European country. So what is the correlation between the agricultural workforce, the rural migration to urban, the urbanization process, and how we can get our population to be rooted at the place where they are born or hometown and improve the society over there? How can we provide them an education which convinces them in such a way that they need not go for greener pastures, but they can improve their own condition? Because in reality, everything boils down to the human condition today in every aspect of our lives.
Mm-hmm.
And with rural-urban migration, we see the amount of crime rate, we see the amount of chaos, the urban chaos.
Crime rate means people who come from villages are
Yeah,
more prone
usually,
to
yeah,
criminality
they
than
don't
people in
get
cities.
jobs. No, they don't get jobs, so any petty job. And
But
then
they're not
they
prone to criminality more than people in cities.
Yeah, they are
right?
not prone, but then with the increase in population and the desire to survive, so perhaps forces them.
Okay.
Circumstances.
Fine.
These are some.
I mean, agriculture generates.
Thank you.
Agriculture is 50% of our labor force, and it only generates 15% of our GDP. India became the largest producer of milk in the world last year. We produced 120 million tons of milk, but 75 million people did that. The US produces 60 million tons of milk with 100,000 people. So our 75 million people aren't employed, they're hanging out. But most importantly, they're condemned to poverty. My submission is that no society has reached, I don't think per capita GDP is a goal. I think median household income is a goal. If you don't reach median household income, if you don't move your people off farms. Now the question is, does farms move to services? Does farms move to factories? But you're not going to be able to support 50% of our GDP. I mean, the only way to help farmers is to have less of them. So, you know, Deng Xiaoping's genius from 300 million people have made the farm to non-farm transition. So there are 5 transitions, right, which are journeys to higher productivity: farm to non-farm, rural to urban, subsistence self-employment to wage employment, informal to formal, and school to work. In various ways, these transitions are what our journeys to where life. But it's hard to make agriculture viable. I mean, 45% of farmers in the US are not viable. And the US
subsidies. US government pays huge subsidies to their farmers.
Yes, but only 3% of the labor force is employed in agriculture, right? So we have 50%. So I know taxpayer-funded social security is a good idea, but if we paid half our per capita GDP to 26% of our population below poverty, we could wipe out tax receipts. So social security, taxpayer-funded social security is not an option. In fact, it was never an option. You know, when Bismarck is the guy who started social security. He promised, like any good politician, he promised to pay people at 60 when the life expectancy was 42. So he made the ultimate promise which he didn't have to keep, but that has changed now, right? So my submission is taxpayer-funded social security is not an option. The only social security India can afford is job, skills, and education. That is social security. It's not taxpayer-funded social security is off the table now. So we can't make people productive where they are. My submission is it is patronizing to say that people are happier in villages. They're not. And you won't be able to, 6 lakh of our villages, 2 lakh of those villages have less than 200 people. You can't take jobs to a place with 200 people. It's just not going to be viable. The question for us to answer is, why did Bangalore become Bangalore, and what kind of urbanization do you want? It's very interesting, right? Why did Bangalore become Bangalore? Is it because Grumble planted trees there? Is it because it was the first electrified city of India? Is it because the Diwan of the Mirza made a venture capital investment in Walchand, which became HAL? I mean, it can be all kinds of explanations, but you can't sort of create Bangalore from policy ex ante versus ex post. And second is, are we going to shove more people into these 50 cities? See, Beijing just announced their 9th ring road. It is 900 kilometers in circumference and 125 kilometers from Tiananmen Square to the furthest point. So if you draw a circle around Delhi, that'll be Beijing. Or Tokyo now has 36 million people, the greater Tokyo. I mean, 1/3 of Japan lives in and around Tokyo, right? So I don't think we don't want to shove more people into Delhi, Bombay, Bangalore. We have to build new cities, or we have to convert our existing cities to the big ones. Because productivity is linked to urbanization. Urbanization is not a child of productivity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Questions? Yes, please. The mic.
Thank you. I must say, very informative and a very vibrant session. Lots of new statistics that have emerged, and we are enlightened to have those.
Thank you.
I have two quick questions. The very first one, which you said that we have definite number and indefinite numbers and definitions of labor, wages and all. But do you have any definition, according to you, I think you must have, for skilling as well? Can we say this person is skilled or that person is not skilled? Or do we have any bare minimum benchmarks saying that this defines a certain level of skill in people? And second, I have a question saying that now government has already announced that skill development or skilling is a mission. Now we'll have 400 million skilled or employable people by 2022. That's the target. How do you foresee that? Do you see India getting along those targeted deadlines, or what's your vision for India? I mean, where do you think India would be there?
Yeah. So it's your first question is linked to the second. What is your definition of quality? Is your definition of quality a job? Is your definition of quality a job at minimum wage? Is your definition of quality a premium to minimum wage? That's up to you. In my world, a job is the definition of quality, at minimum wage, of course. But after that, you're on your own. I think there are too many kids in India who are stuck in the informal sector at a fraction of sort of minimum wages in the formal sector. So my definition at this point in time for the next few years would be, is the outcome a job? That's where I come from. I know there are lots of people who say, well, if you don't give a premium to minimum wages, then what's the point? I mean, how does he live? I don't know what a living wage is, right? That's an interesting argument. What is a living wage? A living wage in Bombay is different from a living wage there. And anyway, I know lots of my friends who have higher standards of living than I do. So the living is different in different cities, it's different for different people. But if we take a goal in India, to my mind, is median household income, is how I think about poverty. I don't think about per capita GDP, I think about median household income. I think if you have 2 or 3 members of the family getting a multiple or at minimum wage or 1 time or 2 times minimum wage, then you've sort of got to that. So that's my definition of quality. My definition of quality is 7,000 rupees a month. Let's just say that. My average salary is 16,000 rupees a month, but I'm fine if I give kids 7,000 rupees. I wish the Haath wali salary versus Chitti wali salary gap was lower, but 7,000 rupees is my current definition of salary. I think by next year it'll probably be 10, and then it'll obviously go up, right? That's the point of development. Salaries going up is not a bug, it's a feature, right? So 7,000 will go to 10,000. The second, will we get to 440 million? I think we might. If we sort of break a lot of the regulatory cholesterol, which currently holds us back. As is whereas condition, it's probably hard to get to the 440 million. But it's not going to come purely from skilling. It's going to come from everything I said. It's going to come from the shifting from informal to formal. It's going to come from urbanization. If we don't do urbanization, you're definitely not getting to the 440 million. You're not creating jobs in Itawa or Dausa or Chunjunu. I mean, you're creating some domestic consumption jobs there of mobile phone operator or repair or a few, but that long tail is only is only sales, customer service, logistics, and that's a very small sort of percentage. So unless we do all the 5 geographies of work and the 3 things on matching, repair, and prepare, no, we don't get to 440 million. But if we do that, I think absolutely we can get to the 440 million. I have no doubts in my mind. This is not a lack of willingness. This is not a lack of financing. This is not a lack of imagination. It is regulatory cholesterol. It is our inability to do what we want to do, or what I want to do, or what others want to do.
Yes, please.
Thank you for the nice speech you've given us. My question was, you earlier mentioned about kids from smaller cities are more grateful for jobs than kids who are in bigger cities. Now my question is that sometimes a person has to do a job because they have no choice. Now is it a matter of actually upskilling them or trying to see what the best job is as per the requirement of the industry, or is it more like an attitudinal behavioral change that has to be done, which has to be incorporated for the person or for the job that he has?
From whose perspective? From the employer's perspective or from the employee's
I'm
perspective?
talking about the industry as a whole. Because
From the employer's perspective.
Because some people are saying that I have to do this job, I need a job, I have my family, I don't mind earning 10,000-12,000 rupees a month or whatever, but this is not the job that I want to do, but I don't mind learning about it. And so it's more of a forceful nature that the person has to learn.
So it's like a spiritual fit between what you want to do in life and what the job you have. I mean, most of us end up doing jobs we don't want to do, right?
Right. So I mean, like, how do you contribute, and how do you make that person want to do that, be more efficient at it, like from within, like.
Oh my God.
So the repair, prepare, and upgrade continuum. You're talking about upgrade, right? Which is once he's already in the workforce, how do you make him better?
For example, when you're recruiting people and when you're training people, I'm sure there must be some sort of people who come to you because they have to come to you.
Oh, everybody comes to me because they have to come to me.
Yeah, right.
Why would somebody come to me who didn't have to come to me? I'm saying, if you're saying that people have to work for a living, is that horrible? People have to work for a living. I'm not understanding your question. I'm not being flippant here. If you're saying that, what about people who want to upgrade their skills once they're in the workforce, which is the upgrade sort of continuum? Yeah, there's a repair, prepare, and upgrade sort of continuum. Upgrade, actually corporates invest quite a bit in upgrading their employees whom they've targeted as listers or people who are high productivity or firm-specific skills. Of course, companies invest in firm-specific skills. So if you're saying that once you get in the workplace, do employers take responsibility? Sure. My only point was employers can't take responsibility for prepare. They can't take responsibility for what schools should have done. They can't take responsibility for what colleges should have done. You may feel that they do, but I'm just saying that they can't. I mean, if we want to solve the problem, let's figure out the mechanics of making it work. So yes, some people have to work for a living, and that's fine. Most people have to work for a living. I mean, if that's your question.
Well, my question was that when you train people, you also train them, for
in soft skills?
More like an attitudinal behavioral change.
Soft skills, yes.
For them
Yes,
to.
we have in fact, we have a 4-day course which is just tuck your shirt in, take a bath, shave, and cut your nails. And that actually improves employment outcomes. In the 7-minute interview, you get in telecom sales by 200%. So that's part of attitude. I'm not being patronizing here. Nobody's told them to tuck their shirt and take a bath and shave before the interview. So if you do that, then the employment outcomes improve substantially, while at higher stages, you'll have to do much higher development. But I don't really focus on that segment. There is a segment of the market which is focused on sort of higher things. That's not that's above. I don't fish in that pond. Okay, I'm focused at the bottom of the pyramid.
Yes, please.
You're quite sanguine about realizing the target of 440 million in terms of skills. But what about employment? Do you have any?
No, that's why I said that 440 million is 5 geographies of work and the 3 matching, repair, and prepare problems. In the past, we have always thought of supply as independent of demand. So if you think about supply without labor law reform, without ease of doing business, without GST, no, I don't think we get to 440 million. I think 90% informality is today a bigger problem than skill development. I actually believe that now after 10 years of skill development. 90% informality is a bigger problem.
Yes, please. Oh, one more hands. They have to come across. Sorry. So no hands on this side.
You're saying that you're happy that engineering colleges are closing down. My point is that they're closing down because what they produce is not useful to employment because they don't have the necessary skills. So are you saying that you should have more ITIs rather than more IITs? Can you not change the curriculum in the engineering colleges so you can have benefit of the degree as well as the ability to perform on the job.
Because the degree matters for the shadi, is it? Or
No, they exist already, these colleges. So can't you improve?
No,
the
they're not
curriculum?
going, but they're being repurposed. Okay, so this is the first year where the top 25% ITI graduates will get more salaries than the bottom 25% engineers, because engineers will join sales jobs at 8,000 rupees as sales promoters, while ITI graduates will join as CNC machine operator at sort of 25,000. So there's already some signaling value going through the market, which is saying that for a CNC machine operator, it's better than being a sort of engineer. The question is, what does being an engineer mean? We don't need 15 lakh engineers. As a society, we need 9 lakhs. The IT industry hires 2.5 lakhs every year. 3 lakhs, 2.5 lakhs? Yeah, 2.5 lakhs every year. The IT industry used to hire 2.5 lakhs engineers when we used to produce 5 lakhs. They still hire 2.5 lakhs, now we produce 15 lakhs, because so everybody was sort of anticipating that. But the IT services business has changed, right? The first $100 billion in revenue for the IT business created 3 million jobs. The next $100 billion will only create 1 million jobs. And that there's nothing wrong with that. They are focused on productivity, so they're not going to be hiring at the rate that they hired in the past. So if engineering colleges shut down, that's good. The good ones will survive. Faculty salaries will go up in the ones which are left, and you will have signaling value. I mean, all the crappy engineering colleges, RV, BMS, everything in Bangalore, which was set up in the 80s, are actually pretty good now, and they're the supply chain for IBM, Accenture, and them. But 50 of them shut down, and the 5 who have survived are doing well.
Good. So, yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yes. Good. Yes, we'll come to the. Yes, please. Can you make the questions briefer, please? I see a lot of hands up suddenly, and we are nearing the end of our time.
Thank you for a most enlightening talk. I wanted to know if you feel people are listening to you. People who make policy are the ones you have to reach with these ideas, with this perspective. So is there a mechanism, is there some way in which you are being listened to, you're being heard in the quarters that matter?
Yes.
Yes. I want to add an emphatic yes to that, because Manish's voice carries a lot of weight.
So I chaired a committee for the last Prime Minister's Skill Council on Apprenticeship Act reform. I chaired that committee in 2007. Till 2009, nothing happened. So I kept screaming and shouting, saying, why aren't you doing any reform? Anyway, they called me in 2009 and said that, are you going to keep screaming or do you want to do something? I said, actually, I'm tired of screaming. I want to hire 2 lakh apprentices. They said, how much money do you want? India, from the government, if you want to hire 2 lakh, India only has 2 lakh apprentices. I said, I want no money from the government. They said, why would we oppose that? That's like a private NREGS. Go ahead and apply. So in 2009, I applied for something called NETAP, National Employability Through Apprenticeship Program. And I got 37 letters from the Ministry of Labor between 2009 and 2014. One of them said, oh, you'll use this to hire old people. I said, okay, nobody above 35 can join. They said, oh, you'll use this to hire young people. I said, okay, nobody less than 18 can join. They said, oh, you'll use this to exploit them. You won't, stipend will be very low. I said, okay, that's a good point. I'll pay them the unskilled minimum wage as stipend of the state. They said, oh, you'll use this to keep rolling them over. You'll never make them apprentices. You'll never make them employees. You'll keep rolling them over. I said, good point. I'll biometric everybody. Nobody can stay in a tap for more than 2 years. Then they said, oh, you'll use this to hire people in mines. I said, okay, jaane do yaar, I won't do in mines. Anyway, till 2014, I didn't get the approval. And about 7 months ago, NETAP got started, and we now have 13,000 apprentices.
Good.
So that's one. I can give you 5 more. But I would submit labor law reform in Rajasthan. I would submit, that is now 7 more states doing more labor reform. State skill missions doing convergence, where they're transferring the employment department and ITI and apprenticeship. 9 more states are thinking about a vocational university.
Good progress.
Yeah, so you have to go to state capitals to feel happier about India. You guys live in the wrong city.
Yeah.
Well said.
Yes. So my question is related to what was asked earlier, which is that, I mean, typically, corporation or firm, you need complementarity between low productive jobs, but also you need people at the high end also, right? So you need like engineers, for example, who actually know how to perform their job. So you touched on the thing, but I want to know what your perspective is on the high end. Do we have?
We have that.
We'll have enough people to.
Yeah, we have more than enough people. In fact, they'll have to downgrade. You know, in 64% of kids in Canada in the vocational system already have a degree now. They're coming the other way because they're not getting a job there. They're coming this way. At the high end, we're fine. In fact, we're world class, I would say. That is the problem of focusing on higher education after independence rather than primary education.
Yeah.
There are many skill development programs which are being offered under different government schemes, which offers free training and free food, of course. But as you said, still people don't turn up for training. So because that the certificate which the sector skill councils or the government bodies are offering, they still don't have very much validation. They don't hold any validation in the market as such at the moment. So we run a security company also. So a security guard says that why should I take up this training? Because he says that if I get the certificate, will you pay me extra after I get the certificate or after I'm certified? So how do you
So there's no
this?
skill premium, is it, in the market?
Skill premium.
So how do you look at this? Should it be the other way around, like you said, it's a chicken egg thing, that the government should first pass a bill or something saying that if you have the certificate, then only you can work on it?
No, that won't work. What is the signaling value of an ISB degree? AICT has been after ISB saying you don't have an MBA certification, you don't give a degree. So ISB doesn't give a degree, ISB gives a diploma. Why is the ISB diploma so quickly become almost equal to an IIM in signaling value? See, you can either be like IIMs and IITs with tight entry gates and wide open exit gates. Or you can be like the chartered accountant exam with wide open entry gates and tight exit gates. Vocational training is wide open entry gate and wide open exit gate, right? So the signaling, but this is at the heart of the, can we be equal and excellent? The quantity versus quality dilemma. In India, we've got to, this is not a maximization problem, this is an optimization problem. We need to expand quantity higher than what traditionally people would say would be the right speed limit for quality. But we are in a democracy and we need to do that. I mean, I don't think there is, this is an optimization problem. Engineering went too high, now engineering will come down from 15 lakhs to 8 lakhs. There will be a problem in the interim. And in the interim, employers have to figure out what they will use as signaling value, right? So a degree is no longer a lazy proxy for filtering, right? I met a BA in English in a job fair in Gwalior, I think, and he kept shoving his certificate in my face and kept answering my questions in Hindi. I said, "You're a BA in English, yaar, and why aren't you answering me in English?" So, "Aapko sach bataun, sir, BA English Hindi mein kiya maine." So I can write it, but I'm not going to talk to you, and I don't know how to write. And he could write, and he couldn't write. So then I obviously can't use that BA in English as a filtering for signaling value. I have to figure out 100 things. So why am I cribbing so much about skills? Because I used to kiss 50 frogs to find a princess. Now I have to kiss 100 frogs to find a princess. In some places I have to kiss 200 frogs to find a princess because the signaling value of the education system is low. But that is, water is finding its own level. We figured out how to do assessments. We figured out how to do shortlisting. I mean, that's why we've hired 15 lakh people, right?
Good.
Out of the 20 times that who came to us.
Okay. The last question out there. No? Okay.
In this current scenario, what is the definition of jobs? Because in the high profile, we see attrition rate. Attrition rate is very high, although they are getting salary.
What does attrition rate mean? When people leave, is it?
They don't.
But what's a permanent job anymore?
So in the erstwhile eras, we used to have fixed people working for 10, 15 years. But nowadays,
So
2-3 years.
I wasn't around then, but you're confusing nostalgia with amnesia. I mean, in the private sector, for 90% of India, you've never had 10, 15 years. So you always extrapolate the small formal sector to be the jobs of India. 90% of India has worked informally. 90% of India's enterprises are informal. So my submission is, please don't take attrition as a bug, it's a feature. From an employee's perspective, when all my clients crib, he's leaving for 300 rupees. Yeah, 300 rupees is 5% more at his salary. He's leaving for 500 rupees. Why is it? I mean, attrition in the formal sector is usually for progress, right? Is that a bad thing or is it a good thing? Or if you're speaking from an organization's perspective, institutional memory, I don't know. I mean, can organizations offer lifetime employment? I think that train has left the station, sir. So,
And in the contractual, the government is contractualizing the scenario nowadays in
what's
jobs.
the difference in a contract employee and a normal
Your
employee?
terminal benefits are withheld. You are not given full terminal, which used to get.
It's illegal. The law makes no distinction. So if there is somebody holding terminal, in fact, India is one of the only countries in the world where there is no difference in benefits between contractual and permanent employees. So if somebody is not giving benefits, that's illegal. That's a different argument. There is no other there are few countries in the world, but India, I'm proud to say, is one of them, where there is no difference between the benefits, PF, ESI, minimum wage, which is applicable to a contract employee program. Now, how it works in practice is because 29% of India is on temp or contract. It should only be 5%. Most global markets have 5% of their market. Why do we have 29% of our labor force? It's because of labor laws. So my submission is, if you want to enforce your laws, make them enforceable. The Chief Labour Commissioner day before yesterday said, I'm trying to enforce the unenforceable. If he's going to say that, then you've got to listen to him and say, okay, I'll make this the law, and then I will give you the power to enforce it. I have no argument with putting people in jail who don't pay minimum wage, who don't give benefits, who don't give leave, and who don't provide good safety and working conditions. But don't make it 59 things, which is, I mean, if I don't have a creche, you're going to put me in jail. If you don't have this, you're going to put me, that's just impossible. I mean, it's not going to work for most of corporate.
Thank you, Manish. Just a few comments before I hand over to Subhashish to make a few closing remarks. I think Manish made some excellent insights into how the system works, how it can be fixed, as I heard him saying, and the fact that not only can be, but where some states, and I must add thanks to his leadership pushing and prodding, are moving in a certain direction, and we will see where they go. They've made changes in labor laws. Some people are skeptical, some people are very happy, but let's see what the outcome is, and I think we'll begin to see that very, very soon. The other point I do want to emphasize, and Manish and I spent just a minute outside before he came in, is that while there's a sort of mood of cynicism among many in Delhi that nothing is happening, at least in this field, as Manish assures me and he knows, there is a lot that's happening, a lot that's happened in the last year in particular. But what's particularly interesting is that much of that action, with the benign permission, if you say that, of the central government, it is permission in ways, is happening in the states. And that's interesting because there are different states, they will compete, there will be different things done. And I think if we are in the mode where states compete with each other to get better laws, more efficient outcomes, better outcomes, whether it's in education or skilling or colleges, or in anything else, in health or education broadly, I think it will be a great day because we need them to compete in that area. And already we can see that at least in this area, in terms of thinking that this will attract jobs, I think it will, but let's see what happens. These changes will make a difference. Rajasthan was a pioneer, Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, a lot of other states are now following, and many others are in the pipeline to do things, each one in their own way, and that's nice. We'll have a diversity of things, better than one central law, because we know this templatized method in India just doesn't work. We're just too diverse for that. We've tried it for many years. It's not a good solution. Sometimes it may be all right, but many times it's not. And he gave an excellent example of wages and what people expect from the people's expectation point of view. Forget cost of living and what Bombay costs versus what living in your hometown costs or your home village costs. The reality on the ground is that people see this very differentially. So to have things like, a common defined wage or any such thing doesn't make great sense. Depends on where you are, not just which state, but maybe where you are in that state. Lots of such variables, and I think they'll come into play as we go on. Just a point to what Manish said, and Manish and I may continue to differ on this, but to clarify, not so much to Manish, who I think knows this, but to all of you, that I don't think that I meant, from what I said, maybe I miscommunicated, that India doesn't have a future in manufacturing, or that we are innately not able to do it. I think my argument, and I would continue to hold that till we make a change, as the Chinese have done. It's not that it can't be changed, but in the near future, we will continue to be people who tend to be very independent in thinking. And independent thinking people are not good robots. And therefore, when you talk of low-end, unskilled, hands-only manufacturing, I don't think we can compete. But that's not the point. We yet might compete, and I know a few industries are. We can't compete on the supporting infrastructure. It will take many, many, many years to fix our infrastructure, both physical infrastructure, roads, ports, movement of goods, and more importantly, our legal or bureaucratic infrastructure, whereas everybody tells me, I yet remember talking many years ago to Nokia, and he's talked to Foxconn recently, who thought I'm mad. He says, do you know how many days it takes me to get, I'm a global supply chain. If you want me to manufacture in India, if I get, how many days it takes me to get a part in, after it's landed at the airport in Chennai to get it to my factory, and how many days it takes me to get something out after I finish in the factory to put it on the plane. The kind of paperwork required, the costs required, It's just horrendous. And he says, look, we operate in hardware on margins of 2 and 3%. I just can't afford this kind of thing. Forget your labor productivity. The Nokia factory, by the way, in Chennai turned out to be amongst, if not number one, they're most productive. So to Manish's point, I completely agree with him that we can do it if we want to and things are right. But there are other variables in the ecosystem that don't permit that. Hopefully they'll change and change soon. But I am somewhat skeptical about how fast they'll change. And therefore the argument would be that in manufacturing, if you want to compete, we've got to do things where the labor is adding much more value, which means skilling, education, moving up. In any case, there's a market. But that's a different argument altogether. I think Manish is training people for what I think is the right areas, which is basically it's in the services sector where you're going to see job growth. Manufacturing, if we create jobs, will get automated in no time, and the bottom slicing will happen first. They won't displace an engineer, they'll displace the guy who's carrying stuff first, and the guy who's doing stuff on the assembly line next with robots, and then something else. So if we are looking at creating, 400 million jobs in the next few years in manufacturing, I think, to me, that's a dream. It's never going to happen. But yes, you talk 400 million jobs between some in manufacturing and mainly in supporting services, whether it is feet on the street for a whole host of services, or it's tourism support, or it's just supporting lifestyles of the rich and mighty. Fine, I think there'll be jobs there. Anyway, I said those are different arguments. We will not have a Google driverless car in a while, so we can yet employ drivers, but that will go different. Finally, before I hand over to Subhashish, I think, Manish, I want to thank you, again, as I said earlier, for bringing so many insights, spending time here, and again, doing it in a tremendous way. As I said earlier, I got many of your quotable quotes down, and I'm sure many of us will use them. And, I'm hopeful that with your ability to influence governments, irrespective of their political color, and your emphasis on not what needs to be done, which is fairly well known, enough committees have done it and said it, but how to do it. And I think you've shown that there are possibilities there. The fact that you employed 15 lakh people in this short period of time is one indicator of what can be done. So good luck to you, and more weight to your hand as you move ahead, and more thrust to your voice. Let me hand over to Subhashish to do the closing.
I think 7 or 8 years ago, some of us were in Bangalore then, meeting in Manish's office with some 20-25 entrepreneurs and businesses, local entrepreneurs and businesses, which Manish had put together. And we were discussing innovation and entrepreneurship. And when 2-3 people started saying that, they need changes in government policy, they need changes in the way government functions, they need changes in government practices such that an ecosystem can be created for innovation, Manish jumped in and said, if there are no hurdles to cross, then what will we innovate on? Right? And I think Manish typifies that approach, that he really believes that a challenge is an opportunity, and that's what he has done. All of us talk about challenges being opportunities. Very few of us actually show that. Right? And Manish is remarkable in that he has actually done that. I remember all the problems he used to tear at his hair. I don't know how he still has that lock of hair. But he used to tear at it talking about the labor laws and how he was waiting to be picked up by the police any day for what he was doing. But he's done it, right? So thank you very much, Manish, for that wonderful presentation. Thank you, Kiran, for chairing the session. And thanks to all of you for attending today's session. Thank you.